The music swelled, soft and sweet, as she walked down the aisle in her white dress. Every step echoed in her chest, her heart beat louder than the drums, louder than the whispers of the guests who turned to watch her. It was her day, the one she had imagined 1,000 times, the day she would leave her past behind and step into a new life. Her groom waited at the end, eyes filled with love, smiling with a patience that gave her courage. She breathed slowly, forcing herself to move, holding her bouquet tightly so no one could see her trembling fingers. Then it happened. Halfway down the aisle, she froze. At first she thought it was her nerves, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. But then her eyes wandered over the sea of faces, the smiles, the joy, the curiosity of friends and strangers, and locked onto one face. A face she thought she would never see again. Her breath caught in her throat. Her bouquet slipped a little in her grip. It was him. The man she had once loved, the man she had left behind. He stood quietly at the back, almost hidden in the crowd, but his eyes found hers with terrifying certainty. The years between them dissolved in an instant. Memories came rushing back. His laughter, his voice, the nights they had whispered promises of forever. She had buried those memories, told herself he was gone, told herself she had moved on. But there he was, alive, real, watching her marry someone else. Her chest tightened painfully. She tried to take another step, but her knees weakened. Her mother, standing near the front, gave her an encouraging nod, mistaking the fear in her eyes for nervous joy. Guests leaned forward, smiling, waiting for her to continue. The groom shifted slightly, puzzled at her sudden pause. But none of them saw the storm raging inside her. Only he did. His gaze was calm, steady, but filled with something unspoken. Regret? Or a silent plea? She couldn't tell. All she knew was that it tore open everything she had worked so hard to bury. She blinked rapidly, her vision blurring. Her lips trembled as if she might call his name, but she couldn't. She couldn't destroy the moment, couldn't expose her secret to the people who believed she was stepping into happiness. And yet, how could she walk forward, pretending she didn't see him? The music continued, but in her ears it was distant, drowned by the rush of blood pounding through her head. The air felt thick, suffocating. She could see the groom waiting, his smile faltering, concern growing in his eyes. But she could also see the stranger from her past, the man who wasn't supposed to be here, the man who once owned her heart, standing silently as if daring her to choose. Her mind screamed at her to move, to keep walking, to forget. But her heart refused. She felt the walls of the church closing in. The aisle stretched longer, heavier, as though the ground itself would not let her pass. Her hands shook violently now, her bouquet trembling like a leaf in the wind. A whisper rose in the crowd, confusion, curiosity, yet still she couldn't move. Finally, in a rush of panic, she turned. The bouquet slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a soft thud. Gasps filled the hall. The groom's voice broke the silence, calling her name, desperate and afraid. But she didn't look back. Her dress swirled as she turned toward the doors, her breath ragged, her chest burning. She ran. Her heels clicked furiously against the floor, her veil trailing behind her like a broken promise. Guests stood, shouting in confusion, but she heard none of it. All she could hear was the sound of her own heart and the echo of his eyes staring back at her. She pushed through the doors into the blinding sunlight, and kept running, away from the wedding, away from the life she was supposed to choose. Behind her, the church erupted in chaos. But she didn't stop. She ran because in that single moment, one face from her past had reminded her of who she truly was, and who she could never escape. The hall was glowing with lights, filled with laughter, the air heavy with flowers and music. She walked down the aisle with a radiant smile, her heart pounding not just from nerves but from the weight of everything she was leaving behind. Every step felt like a promise, every cheer from the guests like a blessing for the life she was about to begin. She let her gaze drift over the crowd, her friends, her family, neighbors who had come dressed in their best clothes. Smiles everywhere, hands clapping, eyes gleaming with joy. It was perfect, exactly how she had imagined it. Until her eyes landed on one face. For a heartbeat, her chest tightened. At first, she thought she was imagining it, a trick of the light or her own fears creeping up in this moment of joy. But no, he was really there. Sitting quietly at the back, half in shadow, but his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that pierced straight through her smile. She froze inside though her feet kept moving. The world dimmed around her, voices turning into a distant hum. Because she knew what he carried. The secret that could end everything. She had worked so hard to build this day, to bury her past, to wrap it in silence and lock it away. And yet, here he was, the one person who knew the truth. A truth sharp enough to cut through her veil, through the dress, through the carefully painted future she had crafted. Her groom waited at the end of the aisle, his face shining with love. He had no idea. He only saw the bride he adored, the woman he believed had never betrayed, never lied, never hidden anything dark enough to shatter trust. But the man in the crowd knew. She remembered the night it had all happened, the mistake, the desperate choice, the tears that followed. He had been there. He had witnessed what no one else ever knew. She thought he had gone forever, disappeared into the folds of time. She thought silence would protect her. But silence has a way of breaking. Her lips quivered, but she kept smiling for the crowd, pretending everything was fine. Her hands clutched the bouquet so tightly the stems nearly snapped. A bead of sweat slid down her back despite the cool air. Would he speak? Would he rise from his seat and tell everyone the truth she had hidden? She imagined it, his voice echoing across the hall, the shocked gasps, the groom's face collapsing into betrayal. Her life ending in a single moment. Her stomach twisted painfully. She forced her eyes away, but she couldn't escape the weight of his presence. Every laugh from the guests sounded hollow. Every clap rang with the threat of exposure. She felt naked beneath her gown, stripped bare by the knowledge that he was there, watching. When she reached the front, the priest began his words, the ritual of vows that were meant to bind her to a new beginning. Her groom reached for her hands, his touch warm, steady, trusting. It almost broke her. Because she knew, if the truth ever surfaced, that trust would crumble to dust. And still, from the corner of her vision, she could see him. Silent. Patient. A shadow carrying a truth like a dagger in his chest. Her lips trembled as she whispered the vows, the words sticking to her throat. The groom smiled at her, gently squeezing her fingers as if to tell her she was safe, she was loved. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to bury the fear, to convince herself that silence would last forever. But deep inside, she knew the truth was alive, breathing in the same room, watching every move she made. And the thought terrified her. Because weddings are built on promises. But one secret, one word, one revelation, could turn all those promises into ash. She smiled for the pictures, laughed for the guests, and kissed the man she was supposed to love forever. But as her veil fluttered in the evening air, she couldn't stop glancing back, searching for the eyes of the one who knew everything. And in that moment she realized, she wasn't running toward a new life. She was running from an old truth. A truth that had found her again. The hall was alive with music and color, every chair filled, every face turned toward her. The bride walked slowly down the aisle, veil glimmering under the lights, her heart racing faster than the steps of her feet. People whispered about her beauty, about the happiness on her face. To them she was glowing. To them she was perfect. But she knew better. Inside her a shadow still lived. She had buried it long ago, wrapped it in silence, prayed no one would ever dig it out. For years she had told herself the past couldn't hurt her anymore. She believed she had escaped it, that no one would ever bring it back to light. Until she looked into the crowd. Her gaze drifted across rows of smiling guests. Laughter, clapping hands, proud families. And then her breath stopped. Pair of eyes. Sharp, unwavering, locked on her like a blade. She stumbled, just slightly, but enough that a murmur rippled through the crowd. She forced herself to smile, to steady her steps. But inside her heart screamed. Because she recognized those eyes. They were the eyes that had once seen her darkest mistake. In an instant everything came back. The night of her greatest weakness. The choice that had left her trembling, ashamed, begging the silence to keep her safe. She had thought no one knew, but someone had been there. Someone had witnessed. And now that someone was sitting in her wedding, watching her walk toward a future built on lies. Her bouquet shook in her hands. Her throat tightened. She wanted to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen, but she couldn't. Those eyes held her prisoner. They told her, I remember. I know what you did. The groom smiled at her from the altar, unaware. His eyes were filled with trust, with love, with dreams of tomorrow. And it broke her. Because how could she take those vows while the past stood in the room, alive, unblinking? Her pulse hammered. The priest's voice began its gentle words, but they blurred, drowned out by the roar of panic inside her head. She kept her gaze low, terrified of seeing those eyes again. Yet she felt them, heavy on her, as though every guest was blind except the one who mattered. She whispered her vows, her lips trembling. Her groom squeezed her hand, mistaking her fear for nerves. The crowd clapped, smiling warmly. But behind their cheer she still saw him, the silent witness. Not a word escaped his lips. He didn't rise. He didn't shout. But silence can be louder than screams. His presence alone was enough to unravel her. What would he do with the truth? Would he keep it buried forever, carrying it to his grave? Or would he wait for the right moment, the right slip, to expose her? Her chest ached with the weight of not knowing. She couldn't breathe freely. She couldn't smile fully. Every laugh sounded fake, every picture forced. She had gotten the life she wanted, but the ghost of her mistake had come to sit among the guests, dressed as a man with eyes that saw too much. That night, when the celebrations ended, when the lights dimmed and everyone was gone, she would still see them. Those eyes. Burning in her memory, reminding her she could never truly escape. Because secrets don't die when you bury them. They live in the hearts of those who witness them. And she had just been reminded, her darkest mistake was not hers alone anymore. Cinematic Kahani approximate 902 words highbrow. Kia main agla outline, the lover uninvited. The man she once promised forever had come to watch her marry another, BISI Terra 900 words main leak Cardu? You said. Bien. ChatGPT said. Samaj Gaya bro thumbs up. Ab main opki Leah 900 words ka cinematic story likta hun outline, the lover uninvited. The man she once promised forever had come to watch her marry another. Par. The air inside the hall was heavy with music, laughter, and the perfume of fresh flowers. She walked down the aisle slowly, veil trailing behind her, every step echoing in her ears like a drumbeat of destiny. Her heart raced, not with joy alone, but with a nervousness she couldn't explain. All eyes were on her, smiling, clapping, blessing her new beginning. To everyone else she was the happiest bride. But then her gaze moved across the crowd. And her heart stopped. There, near the back, almost hidden in the sea of faces, stood someone she never thought she would see again. His posture was calm, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were burning with the memory of promises once made. It was him. The man she had once promised forever. The man she had loved with every fiber of her being before life tore them apart. Her breath caught. Her steps faltered for a second. Guests mistook it for nerves, smiling warmly, some even tearing up at the beauty of the moment. But she knew. She knew her world had just collided with the past she thought was gone. Memories flooded back, the late-night walks, the whispered vows under starlight, the tears of separation, the desperate goodbyes she thought would be their last. She had told herself he had moved on, told herself he would never come back. But there he was, uninvited, watching her marry someone else. She clenched her bouquet tighter, her palms sweating. Her eyes darted toward her groom at the altar, smiling with love and trust, completely unaware. He was her future, the man she had chosen, the man who had given her peace after years of storms. And yet, her heart twisted painfully at the sight of the one who had once been her everything. Why was he here? Was it revenge? Was it love? Or was it just to see if she had truly forgotten him? She tried to look away, but his eyes held her. A silent pull, a wordless cry. She saw the pain he hid beneath his calm. She knew him too well, she had once known every corner of his soul. And she could see it now, the ache of betrayal, the quiet devastation of watching her walk into another man's arms. The priest began to speak, but his words blurred in her ears. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart, all she could feel was the weight of two lives pulling her in opposite directions. The past stood behind her, the future waited in front of her, and she was caught in between, trembling. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to run to him, to explain, to say she hadn't forgotten, that she had never truly stopped loving him. But how could she? The guests were watching. Her groom was waiting. Her family believed this was the happiest day of her life. So she smiled. A broken smile painted on her trembling lips. She whispered the vows, her voice barely steady, her eyes avoiding the back of the room where he stood like a ghost. Her groom beamed at her, his hands warm as he held hers, his love unshaken. But deep inside, she knew someone else still carried her heart. As the guests clapped, as the kiss sealed her new beginning, she stole one last glance at the crowd. He was still there. Still watching. His jaw tight, his eyes glistening with a pain he refused to show. And then, just as silently as he had appeared, he turned and walked away. Her chest tightened, her breath hitching as she realized she had lost him twice now. Once when life tore them apart. And again today when she chose silence over truth. The hall erupted in joy. But she felt hollow. Because weddings are meant to unite two souls. Yet hers had always belonged to someone who was never invited. The lover uninvited. The music of the wedding echoed through the decorated hall, the fragrance of roses mixed with incense filling the air. Laughter and applause rose as the bride made her way down the aisle, her white dress shimmering under the chandeliers. Every step she took was supposed to bring her closer to a new beginning, to the man who promised her safety, honor, and a life far away from the storms of her past. But just as she lifted her eyes toward the crowd, her world stopped breathing. There, at the back of the room, half hidden in the shadows, stood a face she had buried in her memories, a face she had sworn she would never see again. His eyes locked on hers, dark and unblinking, carrying the weight of yesterday. Her grip on the bouquet faltered, her knees weakened beneath the heavy fabric of her gown, and the sound of the guests clapping blurred into a distant roar in her ears. It couldn't be him. It wasn't possible. He was gone. He was supposed to be gone forever. Memories crashed over her like a violent tide. Nights filled with whispered promises. Days drenched in stolen moments. And then, the fire, the accident, the silence. They told her he had died. They told her to move on. She had mourned him, screamed for him, cried until her voice was raw. And then, eventually she accepted that life had to continue without him. That was the only way she survived. And now here he was, alive, breathing, watching. Her heart slammed against her chest as she stumbled. The murmurs of the crowd rose, confusion rippling like a wave across the guests. The groom's smile faltered as he extended his hand toward her, his lips forming her name. But she couldn't hear him anymore. All she heard was the pounding of her own pulse. All she saw was the ghost of yesterday staring at her with eyes that knew too much. Why now? Why today? Her mind spun, grasping at explanations. Was this a cruel trick? Was it really him or just a shadow wearing his face? But no, the scar on his jaw, the tilt of his shoulders, the way he stood, it was him. Undeniably him. The groom's hand touched hers, pulling her gently forward, but her body locked in place. Her gaze refused to let go of the figure in the back. 1,000 questions burned in her throat, but none found their way to her lips. And then, as if sensing the turmoil he had stirred, the man tilted his head ever so slightly, a gesture only she would recognize. A secret signal from years ago. A signal that meant, I know. I remember. And so should you. Her breath caught. He was not just here for her. He was here for something else. The whispers grew louder among the guests. People leaned in, curious about the sudden stillness of the bride. The groom's family exchanged puzzled looks, and the officiant cleared his throat, trying to draw attention back to the ceremony. But she couldn't. She couldn't step forward into a future while the past stood alive behind her. Her fingers trembled. The bouquet slipped from her hands, petals scattering like broken promises on the floor. Gasps erupted. She turned, her gown brushing against the aisle runner, and before anyone could stop her, she ran. She ran past the shocked faces, past the murmurs, past the decorations that suddenly felt suffocating. Her heels pounded against the marble, echoing her racing heart as she pushed through the doors into the cool evening air. But even in her escape, she felt his eyes on her, following her like a shadow she could never outrun. She staggered into the garden outside, her chest heaving, her hands clutching the edge of her gown. Tears blurred her vision. She thought she had healed. She thought she had buried the past deep enough to start over. But the ghost of yesterday had returned, not to haunt, but to claim something, what she didn't know. Behind her, the door creaked. Slowly she turned. There he was, stepping into the moonlight, no longer a ghost but flesh and bone. His lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. You weren't supposed to see me, he said, his voice the same and yet heavier, carrying years of silence. Her breath broke. You're supposed to be dead. I was, he replied softly. But some truths refuse to die. And in that moment she knew, her wedding was not the beginning she thought it was. It was only the continuation of a story she had tried to end. The ghost of yesterday had come back to remind her that the past never really disappears. It waits. It watches. And eventually, it returns. The hall was bathed in golden light, the scent of roses filling the air, and the murmur of guests blending with the soft music. She should have felt like the happiest bride alive, stepping toward the life she had dreamed of, but her heart carried a weight she never spoke of. Each step in her long white gown felt heavy, as though the silence of her past clung to her veil. She kept her gaze straight ahead on the man waiting for her at the altar, his smile calm, his eyes full of promises. But then, her breath caught. There, at the far end of the room, half hidden in the shadowed corner, stood a woman she thought she would never see again. Her mother. The woman's face was older, lined by time, her posture stooped slightly, but her eyes, those deep, piercing eyes, had not changed. They carried the same sorrow, the same unspoken words, the same weight of years lost. For a second, the bride thought she was hallucinating. She blinked hard, her heart racing, the music fading into silence inside her ears. No one else seemed to notice. To the others, it was just another face in the crowd. But to her, it was the ghost of her childhood, standing alive and real. Memories came rushing back, sharp and painful. She remembered being 12, standing by the door as her mother left with nothing but a small bag. Her father's voice had been thunder, her mother's tears quiet rivers. She had waited for her to return, day after day, but she never came back. Letters were never sent. Calls never made. And in those years, silence hardened into anger. She told herself her mother had abandoned her, chosen freedom over family. And now, after more than a decade, here she was, watching silently as though she had a right to witness this new chapter. The bride's hands trembled around her bouquet. She wanted to run, to scream, to demand answers, but her feet remained rooted. Her fiancé's smile blurred in the distance as she turned her face slightly, trying to see if anyone else noticed. But no. Everyone was watching her, the bride. No one saw the quiet storm raging inside her chest. Her mother's lips parted, ever so slightly as if to speak across the distance. But no sound came. Instead, her eyes glistened, reflecting the lights of the hall, as if years of swallowed words had melted into tears she couldn't hold back. The bride's throat tightened. Anger flared first. How dare she come here, uninvited, after all these years of silence? But beneath the anger was something softer, something that hurt more. Longing. For years she had imagined this moment. Her mother appearing, explaining, asking forgiveness. She imagined herself screaming, refusing, pushing her away. But now, with her standing right there, the bride realized she didn't want to scream. She wanted to collapse into her arms like a child again. She wanted to know why. The officiant's voice cut through the haze. "Do you take this man?" She barely heard the words. Her chest rose and fell too fast. Her fiancé's hand reached for hers, but her eyes darted again toward the back. Her mother was still there, still watching, still silent. That silence was unbearable. The bride's lips quivered. Her guest thought she was overcome with joy, but no, her heart was at war. She remembered the nights she had cried into her pillow, whispering "Mama" into the darkness. She remembered watching other girls with their mothers, laughing, fighting, reconciling, living. She remembered hating herself for still longing for the woman who left. And now, when she thought that wound was healed, it reopened with a single glance. Her fiancé squeezed her hand gently, anchoring her to the present. His eyes were calm, steady, but she knew he saw something was wrong. She forced a smile for him, but her eyes betrayed her, darting back again. And then it happened. Her mother raised a trembling hand to her chest, pressing it over her heart as though to say, "I'm still yours. I've always been yours." The bride's knees nearly buckled. She bit her lip hard, fighting back tears. If she broke down now, if she ran to her mother, the wedding would shatter into chaos. Yet if she turned away, if she ignored her, she knew she might never forgive herself. This was the first time in over a decade their eyes had met. And maybe the last. The room clapped softly as the officiant moved to the vows. The bride's voice cracked as she repeated the words, her mind split between two worlds, the life waiting for her in the man's steady gaze, and the life she lost in the woman's quiet eyes. She barely felt the ring slide onto her finger. Her thoughts were trapped in the past. When the ceremony ended, guests cheered, petals floated, music swelled. Everyone crowded around, hugging, congratulating. And still in the background her mother stood. Quiet. Waiting. The bride excused herself, her dress brushing against people's hands as she pushed through. At the edge of the hall, where the lights dimmed and the noise faded, she finally stood before her. For a moment neither spoke. They only stared. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the bride said, "Why now?" Her mother's lips trembled. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Because I couldn't let you start this life without seeing that you were never forgotten." Her anger cracked, her walls fell, and before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. For the first time in years, she felt her mother's arms around her, fragile, shaking, but real. And in that embrace, the world blurred, the wedding faded, and the only thing that mattered was that after all the years of silence, she finally found her way back to her mother's eyes. The wedding hall shimmered with golden drapes, perfumed flowers, and the hum of music. Laughter spilled from every corner as friends and relatives crowded together, waiting for the bride to arrive. She stood at the entrance, her hands trembling inside her embroidered dupatta, her heart pounding louder than the drums. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, the day she would leave behind doubts and begin anew. She stepped into the hall and applause rose like a wave. Every head turned to admire her beauty, every smile seemed warm. Yet, as she walked forward, her gaze wandered nervously across the crowd. She had practiced this walk 100 times, dreamed of it since she was a girl. But dreams had never warned her of the feeling that now crawled over her skin, a quiet unease she couldn't explain. Then it happened. In the far corner of the hall, hidden partially by shadows, a pair of eyes locked onto hers. The stare was sharp, unblinking and piercing as though it cut straight through her veil and into her soul. She froze mid-step. The noise around her blurred, the music dulled, and the voices faded into whispers she could no longer hear. The owner of those eyes did not smile, did not clap, did not celebrate. Instead, the look carried something else entirely, a warning. A silent message that struck her like a knife. Run. Live. Do not stay. Her throat tightened. Her body wanted to move, but her legs felt like stone. Who was it? The face was familiar, yet distant, as if she had seen it in a nightmare long ago. She blinked, hoping it was her imagination. But the eyes did not waver. They followed her every step, commanding her to turn back. She forced herself forward, step after step, her bridal jewelry clinking against the silence she felt within. She tried to smile, to hide her fear, but her lips betrayed her. The hall filled with cheers, but inside, panic boiled. That stare wouldn't let her breathe. Memories rushed in, late-night whispers, threats once made, secrets she had buried. Could it be him? Could it be someone who knew what she had tried to hide? Her chest tightened as sweat trickled down her temple despite the cold air. When she finally reached the stage, her husband-to-be extended his hand to her. His smile was wide, trusting, unaware. She touched his hand, but her eyes betrayed her, glancing back toward the corner. The stranger was still there. Still watching. Still warning. And then she realized, it wasn't just a look of threat. It was urgency. Desperation. Like someone begging her without words. Like someone who knew what was about to happen and was trying to save her. Her heart thudded louder. The ceremony began, people gathered closer, blessings were spoken. Yet she could not hear a word. All she could see was those eyes. They shifted suddenly, not toward her but toward her groom. The warning sharpened. Her chest caved in. Her breath escaped in small gasps. Could it be true? Could the man beside her, the one she thought was her future, be the danger? Why else would someone try so desperately to warn her now here in front of everyone? Her hands shook as she tried to drink water offered to her. Her eyes flickered once more toward the crowd, but the stranger was gone. Vanished into the sea of guests as though he had never existed. Yet his message remained inside her, pulsing through her veins. Run before it's too late. The world spun around her. She remembered whispers she had ignored, questions she had never asked, stories about her fiancé she had brushed aside because love had blinded her. Now, every unanswered doubt came rushing back, louder than the music, clearer than the vows. She looked at her groom again. His hand on hers felt heavier, colder. His smile didn't seem as pure anymore. Was it all a mask? Her pulse raced. The ceremony continued, but her mind had left the room. All she could hear was that silent warning replaying again and again. She stood abruptly, startling everyone. Gasps echoed across the hall. Her groom frowned, whispering her name. The officiator paused, the music stuttered. She didn't wait to explain. She pulled her veil, gathered her gown, and stepped down from the stage. Her mother called out, relatives rushed toward her, confusion rippled through the hall. But she kept moving. Faster. Her heart guided her feet, and the echo of that warning guided her soul. People whispered, some even shouted, but she didn't turn back. She pushed through the crowd, her bangles clashing against arms that tried to stop her. The hall doors loomed ahead. She burst through them, gasping in the open night air, her lungs finally filling as if for the first time in years. Behind her, the celebrations collapsed into chaos. But she didn't care. She couldn't stay. That look had been enough to shatter everything she thought she knew. Somewhere in the darkness, the stranger's eyes still existed. Watching, protecting, or maybe haunting her. She didn't know who he was or why the warning came now, but one thing was clear. She had escaped something far worse than shame. She didn't run from her wedding. She ran for her life. The music swelled inside the decorated hall, the scent of roses heavy in the air. Layla's veil shimmered under the golden lights as she stood at the edge of the aisle, her father by her side. Guests turned their heads, smiles spreading, phones rising to capture the bride's slow walk toward her future. She inhaled, steadying herself. This was the day everyone had waited for. This was the moment she was supposed to walk into happiness. But as she took her first step, her gaze lifted, scanning the sea of faces. At first she saw only laughter, pride, and admiration. Then halfway down the aisle, her breath caught in her throat. One face, just one, stood out like a shadow in the glow of celebration. He wasn't supposed to be here. Armin. Her heart lurched so hard that her bouquet trembled in her hand. His eyes locked with hers across the crowd, steady, unflinching, carrying the weight of 1,000 memories she had buried. His presence was like a crack in the glass of her carefully constructed life. Her father whispered, "Keep walking, Beatty. Don't stop." But her feet felt glued to the carpet. She saw Armin's lips move almost silently, "Remember." And she did. In that instant the noise of the hall faded. She wasn't a bride anymore, she was just Layla, the girl who once ran barefoot with him through fields, the girl who had promised him forever under the shade of an old banyan tree. They had dreamed together, whispered secrets, built futures in their minds. But then came her family's disapproval, the cruel distance forced between them, and finally her silence. She had left him without an explanation, without courage to fight. And now here she was, dressed for another man. Her fiancé, Rahim, stood at the altar, tall and confident, smiling at her as if the world was already theirs. But his smile didn't reach her heart. Because only Armin's face reminded her who she really was. Her throat tightened. She could almost hear Armin's voice from the past. "You can lie to everyone, Layla, but you can't lie to yourself." She took another shaky step, but tears blurred her vision. Every step felt like betrayal, every heartbeat a question she couldn't silence. What was marriage if it began with a lie? Her grip on the bouquet loosened. Her father noticed and whispered sharply, "Layla, what's wrong? This is your wedding day." Her lips trembled, but no words came. All she could see was Armin, his steady gaze, his quiet strength, the truth he carried simply by standing there. When she reached halfway, the hall seemed to close in on her. The music swirled like a cage. She looked at Rahim, then back at Armin. In that moment, her soul screamed louder than the violins playing around her. She couldn't do this. The bouquet slipped from her hand, petals scattering across the aisle. Gasps rippled through the guests. Rahim's smile faltered. Her father's hand tightened on her arm. But Layla shook her head, her voice breaking for the first time. I can't." Whispers exploded through the hall. What is she saying? The bride. What's happening? She looked at Rahim, guilt flooding her chest. "I'm sorry. I can't marry you." "My heart," she turned her head toward the crowd, finding Armin again, "belongs elsewhere." Rahim's face hardened, his jaw clenching. Hurt and disbelief filled his eyes, but he didn't move. Her father's face went pale, anger trembling in his voice. "Layla, do you know what you're doing?" She wiped her tears with trembling fingers, yet her voice grew stronger. "For once, yes. I know exactly what I'm doing." Gasps grew louder as she pulled away from her father's grip and stepped out of the aisle. She walked straight toward the crowd, her eyes never leaving Armin's. Guests turned their heads like waves parting for her. The world around her blurred, the lights, the music, the whispers. Only he remained clear. When she finally reached him, she stopped inches away. Her chest rose and fell, her veil trembling with each breath. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "I had to," Armin said softly. "Because you were about to lose yourself forever." Her tears fell freely now, but they weren't just of pain. They were of release, of truth breaking free. She glanced back at the altar, at Rahim waiting, at her father seething, at the shocked crowd. Then she looked back at Armin and whispered, "I still love you." He didn't move, didn't speak, but in his eyes was everything she had needed to hear. And then she ran. Not down the aisle, not toward the altar, but out of the hall entirely, her veil flying behind her like wings torn free. Armin followed, his steps steady, his presence like the anchor she had lost. Behind them voices rose, scandal brewed, reputations shattered. But outside, under the open sky, Layla finally felt air fill her lungs again. She turned to Armin, trembling, terrified, but alive. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. He reached for her hand, firm and certain. "We'll find out together." And for the first time in years, Layla felt the truth settle inside her like peace. She hadn't just left a wedding, she had uncovered herself.